The wind that morning was unusual, not fierce, not soft, but heavy, as if it carried the weight of something it hadn't yet delivered. It pressed down on the trees that lined the gravel road, rattled the metal wind chimes hanging from the front porch, and stirred the fur on the back of an old shepherd dog who stood motionless in the middle of a cracked concrete path. His name was Roan, an aging mutt with clouding eyes and a limp that spoke of winters endured more than conquered. But that morning he stood like a statue carved by instinct, ears forward, chest low, blocking the front steps of a pale blue farmhouse with paint peeling in thin, curling ribbons. Behind him, the house stood still, quiet, too quiet. A light flickered once in the front window, then failed. There was no sound from within, no coffee brewing, no morning radio, no lazy footsteps, just the hollow creak of wood as the wind rocked the old frame slightly. And standing 10 feet away, 1 foot off the gravel and onto the moss-formed path, was Clara. She was in her late 60s, wiry and upright, with the posture of someone who had never once sat down without something still needing doing. Her face was weathered, not just from sun but from seasons that asked too much. She wore her grief discreetly in the way she folded laundry, in the way she paused before entering certain rooms. Clara had lost her husband to a slow illness 2 springs ago. Roan had outlived him by sheer will. That morning Clara had returned from the orchard early. Something had been nagging at her, a bitter metallic taste in the back of her throat, a twisting in her stomach that didn't feel like anything she'd eaten. She hadn't even removed her gloves when she turned the corner and saw Roan, planted firmly in front of the door like a creature possessed. "Roan," she said, voice steady but slow. "What's the matter, old boy?" He didn't move, just shifted slightly, placing his weight more squarely across the path. Not a bark, not a growl, just presence. Barrier. Clara tried stepping closer. Roan growled low, a sound not from anger but warning. It stopped her in her tracks. He had never done that before. The only time she'd heard him make a sound like that was years ago when a fox had slipped under the fence and tried for the chickens. Roan had chased it clear across the pasture, collapsing under the thorn bush with torn ears and a wild look in his eyes. That growl was a line in the earth, and Clara understood it for what it was. Still, the front door stood there, harmless, slightly ajar. She now realized. Not wide open, but not closed either. A slice of shadow peeking through. The wind played against it, brushing it back and forth. It wasn't like her to leave it like that. A flicker of movement caught her eye. The curtain in the living room window had shifted, not pulled by the breeze but moved, as if someone inside had looked out. But no one should have been home. She hadn't had visitors in weeks. The phone had rung the night before, some vague number she didn't recognize, but she'd ignored it. The answering machine never recorded a message. She stepped back, 1 pace, then another. Roan remained still, his breathing shallow now. The fur along his spine lifted slightly. His eyes, those fading amber wells, were fixed not on her but on the house behind him, watching. Then it happened. A sound deep and thunderous cracked from the belly of the house, like an angry breath being held too long. The porch groaned. The steps shivered beneath Roan's paws. Clara froze. Roan took 1 step backward, then a second, until he was almost pressed against her legs. The ground seemed to hold its breath, and then the house caved in. Not all at once, not theatrically, but in the slow, terrifying collapse of old beams giving way, the roof dipping in first, one side of the second floor folding inward like soft paper, the windows shattering outward with the brittle scream of glass meeting. Air dust billowed from the base like ash. Clara's knees buckled as the porch disintegrated into itself. The door, still swinging, was buried in the wreckage. Had she been standing on that path just 10 feet closer, she would not have been standing at all. The silence that followed was unholy. No birds, no wind, just the crumbling sigh of settling wood and the soft rasp of Roan's breath beside her. She looked down at him, at the way his chest moved, quick and shallow, his paws trembling slightly. He didn't look at her. He was still watching the rubble, still guarding. Clara didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was pounding in her ears, a hard thud like it was knocking to be let out. She reached down, her hand brushing Roan's shoulder. He didn't flinch, just leaned against her, barely. She didn't ask how he knew. She didn't ask what he saw. Instead, she stared at the ruined shell of the home she'd lived in for 37 years, and for the first time in a long time she realized how much of it had been hollow for some time now, not in walls, but in meaning. Behind them, a crow landed on the wire fence, silent, watching. In the dust and ruin, something moved just for a moment, then stilled again. Roan took a cautious step forward, nose twitching at the still settling dust. Clara remained rooted, her gloved hands clutched lightly in front of her, staring at the broken shape of the house, or what was left of it. It wasn't the collapse that held her breath now. It was the movement she'd seen just after, subtle, barely a shift, but real. Something had stirred beneath the debris. She scanned the wreckage, half expecting another tremor, another plank to slide loose or a beam to fall, but nothing came. Just the breathless quiet of ruin. And yet that faint, uncertain flicker, like a hand brushing cloth, like breath against glass, haunted her vision. Roan stood at the edge of the rubble now, the stiff fur on his shoulders lowered, but his body still tense. His paw hovered above the dust before placing down with careful intent. It wasn't curiosity driving him, it was purpose. Clara knew the difference. Dogs didn't walk into fire for curiosity. "Roan, wait," she said, but not firmly, not really meaning it. The air smelled strange, chalky, hot, like earth cracked open and left to burn in silence. A slow wind moved through the orchard behind her now, not strong enough to stir the broken wood, but enough to carry the scent of apples turned early by heat and stress. Clara turned back to the tree line, scanning instinctively for a set of eyes, but no one was there, just the wire fence and the still watching crow. Roan was sniffing now, more determined, nosing at a section of collapsed shingles near where the kitchen would have been. He gave a short bark, not loud, not panicked, just once, a clipped sound that cut through the silence like a spark. Clara moved closer, each step careful. Her boots crunched on glass, but she barely noticed. Her body moved faster than her mind, too many parts running on old muscle memory, the kind shaped by long years of caretaking and not asking too many questions. When she reached Roan's side, he looked up briefly, then pressed his body against a half-buried doorframe. His ears flicked back. There is sound, barely audible, a soft scraping, like skin against wood. Clara crouched beside him, eyes narrowing. She could see where a gap had opened in the flooring, a jagged split between what had once been kitchen tile and the exposed bones of the crawlspace. Something moved in the dark, not large, but alive. Roan whined once, then looked at her. Clara hesitated, her breath caught, not from fear of what lay below, but fear of why it was there. That part of the house hadn't been entered in months. The crawlspace had always been too low, too damp. She had no memory of what might be stored beneath. She hadn't stored anything, had she? Her hand reached toward the splintered frame, fingertips brushing the edge. A groan sounded beneath the wreckage, and she pulled back. Roan shifted his weight, tail stiff. The scraping came again, followed by a thud as if something had fallen or tried to climb and failed. She whispered, "Is someone down there?" No answer, just the soft echo of movement and a wave of heat rising from the collapsed floor. Not fire, not smoke, but something stale, suffocating. The kind of air that hadn't been stirred in too long. Clara stood slowly, eyes hard now. "Stay, Roan." She turned and moved back toward the orchard. She didn't call anyone, not yet. Instead, she walked to the rusting shed near the first row of trees. It had been her husband's tool shed once, now mostly abandoned. She found a lantern, the old kind with a hand crank and thick glass. A crowbar too. She brought them back in silence, her jaw clenched, mind racing. By the time she returned, Roan was lying down next to the rubble, chin on his paws but eyes wide, watching the hole as if expecting something to crawl free. She knelt, again, placed the lantern at the edge of the gap, and turned the crank slowly. Its weak yellow glow barely reached the bottom of the opening, but it was enough to see something. A corner of cloth, frayed and dirt-stained, clinging to a limb. A hand. A child's hand. Clara's heart stuttered. The fingers twitched, not dead. Roan growled, not at the hand, but behind them, toward the woods. Clara turned sharply. The wind had picked up again, bending the taller grass and setting the orchard's shadowed rows into a ripple of soft motion. But something was different. The crow was gone. She waited, listened. Then the sound came. Not from the house, from the orchard's edge. Leaves shifting. A branch snapping. Roan rose slowly to his feet, shoulders low, tail unmoving. Clara straightened. The woods had never felt like a threat before. Now they did. The dust had not fully settled. Clara stood in the faint breeze, its edges now cooler, almost cautious, brushing the side of her face like the hand of a child unsure if it should reach for comfort. Roan remained beside her, his breathing steadying but still tight. He hadn't moved from his spot since the collapse, as if leaving it would undo something, some unspoken vow only he understood. But Clara saw it now, not just the ruin of her house, but the shape of something deeper beneath. The space that had always felt hollow in recent years was now quite literally gone. She took a hesitant step forward, crunching over glass and gravel. Roan followed, slow, deliberate. They moved as if through a cathedral after its roof had given way. The silence was that sacred. Charred wood, shredded insulation, shards of picture frames, and beneath it all, a dark, sunken hollow where the floor had once been. Roan stopped again, lowering his body near what had been the threshold. His ears twitched, but not at the sound of debris, at something deeper. Some frequency Clara couldn't hear. His nose lifted, his hackles this time stayed down. Clara followed his gaze. There, just within the wreckage, was the unmistakable shape of a shoe. Not hers, not Tom's. New men's large. She felt her chest tighten, not from fear exactly. Something colder, more abstract. Disbelief wrapped in the weight of suggestion. Someone had been in the house. She crouched slowly, peering closer. The shoe lay half buried near the base of the hallway wall, right where the floor had given way. And beside it, what looked like the corner of a duffel bag, torn and blackened. Roan let out a low, breathy whine. Clara turned to him, the question already forming on her lips, but it never made it out, because suddenly, The stillness cracked, a cough muffled beneath the debris, then silence again. Roan moved first, pouring forward, cautiously, not in panic but in precision, as if he knew the weight of every step mattered. Clara's breath caught as she dropped to her knees, pushing aside smaller pieces of board and insulation, her gloves scraping against nailheads and splinters. Her fingers found the fabric of the duffel. It shifted. Another cough. This time clearer, a man's voice, broken and weak. "Help, anyone." Clara sat back on her heels. Her mind raced, not just with who this could be, but why. Who had come into her home uninvited? Why had Roan sensed it and stopped her from going inside? And why had the house fallen only after she turned toward the road, half expecting to see someone coming? But it remained empty, just a line of poplars swaying in uncertain rhythm. The sky now a dull pewter behind them. Even the birds had not yet returned. Roan looked back at her once, not for permission, but assurance. Then he pawed again, gentler this time, pressing his nose to a gap in the boards. Clara reached with both hands now, shifting heavier timber. Ignoring the sharp ache in her shoulders, a face emerged. Young, maybe late 20s, pale with soot, sweat streaking through grime. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but confusion. "I didn't know someone lived here," he rasped. Clara stared at him, too stunned to respond. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brushed debris from his shirt, a logo on the collar, construction company. Local, she recognized it. "What were you doing here?" she asked, not angry, not gentle, just raw. "Wasn't supposed to be long," he said. "Just needed a place to sleep." He coughed again, closing his eyes. "I didn't touch anything, I swear." Then the floor it cracked. "I couldn't get out." Clara felt Roan press against her thigh. He wasn't watching the man anymore. He was watching her, and in that moment, she felt it. The truth wasn't in what the man said, it was in what Roan had done. Whatever reasons brought this stranger here, the dog had known it wasn't safe. Not for him, maybe not for anyone. And when Clara had been ready to walk into that house, into a trap of broken boards and an unstable floor, Roan had stopped her, not because he knew about the man, but because something was wrong, deeply wrong. Clara's eyes stung. No tears came. She reached for her phone, fingers unsteady, and dialed for help. The voice on the other end was calm, practiced. She gave the location, her voice flat, businesslike. Emergency responders would arrive within 15 minutes when she ended the call. The man beneath the wreckage had already closed his eyes again, breathing ragged but alive. Clara sat back on her heels once more, staring at the wreckage, at the ruins of memory, of grief, of a life slowly shifting beneath her feet. The wind picked up again, not with menace, but insistence. It rustled the broken beams. It whispered through the holes in the walls. It carried the sound of sirens, faint, distant, but coming. Roan stood beside her, still and alert. Then, from beneath the broken floorboards, something else moved. Not the man, something deeper. The crow didn't move. It tilted its head, black eyes catching the dust light as it watched the ruin. Settle. Clara barely noticed it. Her gaze was fixed on the collapsed bones of the house, on that one patch of shadow near what used to be the porch. Something had moved, not wind, not settling timber. It had been purposeful, small, deliberate. Roan stood rigid beside her, body angled slightly forward, ears twitching now and again as if catching sounds she couldn't. He was no longer trying to hold her back. Instead, he seemed caught between warning and duty, as if guarding not from danger, but toward it. Clara's feet shifted without her meaning to. Just one step, crunching lightly over broken gravel and stray shards of glass. The weight of that sound and the silence felt enormous. The crow gave a soft caw but didn't fly away. She didn't speak. Her voice fell too far back in her throat. But her mind churned with quiet calculations. There were no gas lines in the house anymore, no appliances plugged in, save for the kitchen clock radio that hadn't worked since December. What had caused the collapse? That tremor, the sense of pressure she'd felt before it gave. It hadn't been natural. What would be natural in a place full of decay and memory? Roan walked forward, just 3 paces, cautiously. His paws moved with uncharacteristic silence for a dog of his age. He paused near the edge of the wreckage, nose lifted slightly, not sniffing for scent, but listening. The shadow stirred again. This time, it became clear at a hand, small, covered in dust. Then an arm, moving feebly, groping at the jagged remains of the outer frame. Clara's knees buckled. She barely caught herself on the wooden fence as her heart slammed against her chest. Someone was inside. She didn't scream, didn't cry out. Instead, her instincts took hold in the way only age and long endurance could teach, with motion, not panic. She pulled off her gloves, tossed them aside, and crossed the yard. Roan let her pass. The child, it was a child, maybe 8, maybe 10, was half buried beneath the collapsed rafters and what remained of a hallway cabinet. His skin was gray with soot and plaster, his hair matted, one eye swollen shut. Clara knelt beside him, brushing debris away with a gentleness born from years of tending fragile things. "Don't move," she said quietly, more to calm herself than him. "Just stay with me." He coughed, then whispered something she couldn't catch. Clara leaned in closer. His lips barely moved. He told me to wait. Clara stiffened. Her hands paused. Who did? The boy blinked slowly. The man in the room, he said. Not yet. Clara glanced toward the darker part of the rubble, the portion where her husband's old study had been. She hadn't entered that room in months. Roan padded closer, nosing gently at her arm before letting out a soft, trembling whine. She looked back at the boy, but his eyes were closing again. Faint scratches covered his arms, but none looked fatal. Still, she needed help, real help. She reached for her phone, only to remember it was still in the orchard cart, too far. But the nearest neighbors, the Carsons, had a landline, less than a mile. She could run it. Then she saw it. In the dust, under the boy's arm was a small wooden carving, a bird whittled familiar. Her husband had made dozens like that during his last months, one for every child who came through the community center. He'd said the birds gave them something to hold when they felt like flying wasn't an option anymore. Clara's throat tightened. This boy hadn't just wandered in. He'd been here before. Maybe not yesterday, maybe not even this week. But he'd known. Roan turned toward the wreckage again, body rigid. Another sound, this one more deliberate. Not shifting wood, but the soft scrape of something heavier being moved deeper inside. Clara looked into the ruin's hollow heart and saw, just for a flicker, the outline of someone standing. Still, then gone. The air seemed to thicken. Time slowed. She reached out and clasped the boy's hand, squeezing gently. We're not done here, she whispered. A branch cracked in the woods beyond the orchard line. Roan lifted his head sharply, ears high, nose twitching. The wind picked up again, not like before, not weighted and grim, but sharper now, urgent. Whatever this was, it wasn't over, not even close. Clara stood over the boy as the last shiver of motion faded from the wreckage. That dark outline, the figure hadn't returned. The house, now broken open like a shell, breathed its final silence. Roan had moved to the boy's side again, his body low, almost protective. The child stirred beneath the dust, eyes fluttering, but sleep had claimed him fully this time. Clara brushed the soot from his temple with the edge of her sleeve. Her hands moved without thought, gentle, certain, maternal in a way she hadn't been for years. The wind had softened. It no longer whispered of warning, only fatigue. Branches swayed overhead with a dry, steady rhythm. A crow flew off the fence, wings catching the late afternoon light, and vanished toward the orchard line. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then stopped. Clara heard footsteps crunching down the gravel. Heavy, fast, her name called, distant but urgent. It was Mr. Carson. She recognized his voice. She didn't move to meet him, not yet. Let them come, she thought. Let them see for themselves what had been held back, what had been spared. Roan didn't react to the voices. He simply lay down, resting his head beside the boy's shoulder, sighing in a way that sounded too human. He closed his eyes, not out of weariness but release. The tension that had clung to him for days, maybe longer, had drained away. His instincts, once doubted, had been right. His body had kept watch over a truth that Clara still didn't fully understand. The emergency responders came, slow and cautious. The boy was lifted gently onto a stretcher. He murmured something, a name perhaps. Clara didn't ask what. It didn't matter. Whatever had drawn him there, whatever he had been told by the man in the room, it was tied to the house. And now the house was gone, as if it had swallowed the last of its secrets with its collapse. Later, after dusk had settled like smoke across the trees and the sirens had long since gone silent, Clara sat alone on the back step of the barn. The farmhouse was just a silhouette now, its frame a jagged black shadow against the last strips of sky. A lantern flickered beside her. Roan lay at her feet, not sleeping, just resting the way old dogs do, content with silence and the nearness of someone they trust. She turned the small wooden bird over in her hands. The edges were worn smooth from handling, the beak chipped just slightly. Her husband had made that one near the end. She remembered now. He'd carved it in silence, then placed it on the windowsill in his study, saying only, "Some things are meant to be found." She'd never understood what he meant, not until now. The boy would be all right. They'd said as much. Dehydrated, frightened, but unbroken. He hadn't said how long he'd been inside the house, or why he'd come. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe that would fade from memory in the way only childhood trauma can, not erased, but sealed behind instinct and shadow. But Clara had seen enough to understand what mattered. Roan shifted, placing his muzzle gently on her boot. She looked down at him. His eyes met hers, steady and soft, and in them was something unspoken. Not pride, not even relief, but something closer to farewell. Not a goodbye, just a letting go. She reached down, running her fingers behind his. "Ears, you knew," she whispered. "You always knew." The orchard swayed under the stars, branches creaking in time with the night air. Somewhere in the dark, a fox barked a sharp, lonesome sound, the kind that carried across fields like a memory on the wind. Clara stood, the bird still in her hand, Roan beside her. She looked once more at the ruin of the house. It didn't feel like home anymore, but neither did it feel like loss. Just the end of a chapter that had been quietly closing for years. She walked with Roan back toward the orchard gate. The dog's pace slow but steady, matching her own. No leash, no command. Just two old souls walking into what was left of the night. Behind them, in the dark grass, the bird carving slipped from Clara's pocket and landed softly, beak pointed to the east, as if even now it still wanted to be found.